So guys, thank you all for coming. I think we are all Brazilians here, but we are in the international room, so I will keep the talking in English, right? So that's important to mention it. And I think if anyone is not uh, able to listen, everybody's listening. So I will start, and today we are going to talk about portfolio management, but in a portfolio management in a way that we are trying to compare views of a traditional way in a portfolio management process, and also the agile way of dealing of portfolio in large or in some corporations, right? So for our sessions, we have here the question and answers. I will try to answer the questions during the presentation. So if you guys have something to ask, use the question answer, use the chat. I will be here to answer all the questions I have answer for that, for sure. And so let's start. Um, a little bit about myself. I'm My name is Gustavo Gabriel, and I have plus 20 years of IT experiences in mostly in large companies. And most of this time I've been working with IT strategic planning that covers this subject, that is the portfolio management. And I'm also lean portfolio management and PMP certified. So I know a little bit about the both words, the traditional one and the agile one regarding the portfolio, right? And just for you guys know, I'm living in São José dos Campos, that is Vale do Paraíba in São Paulo state. And if you guys want to reach me, here are my connections, LinkedIn, Twitter, and my email if you want to talk a little bit more after the session and something else. Okay, so let's start. First of all, something to mention is what we are going to talk about here. We are going to have a cursory, a superficial comparison of two ways of dealing with portfolio. The way that we are going to deal in the traditional way and the lean agile. And this is something that we are talking for portfolio managers, strategic planning teams, managers, decision makers, and so on. And what is important here is that we are not going to have the solutions for all the problems. We have some recommendations, but it's important to understand that each company has his attributes, his way of doing things, his market, and it is important to understand that not there is not only a single solution for everybody. So when we are talking about portfolio, we will always think about the context of the company, right? And also, I will show you guys some pitfalls, some traps that we can go when changing from a traditional view of portfolio, uh, lean agile methodology in a portfolio management. And also, it is important to mention something that we are not to talk about much. Uh, we will talk less about which feature of our digital products we will fund, and we will talk much more about which products and initiatives. So features is a helm of portfolio management also, but here for this presentation, we will just focus a little bit more in the projects and the initiatives and so on. Also, we will talk less about control. We will talk much more about decision making. And this talk is to decision makers, the people who support them. And the idea here is focus much more on that decision making. And we will talk less about process. There are lots of process in the portfolio management, but we will focus a little bit more on talking about money, decisions, and so on. Um, for our agenda, we will just have a quick introduction why we need portfolio management. And after that, we will go into this discuss of the comparisons and the pitfalls that we have. We know that agile execution will always demand some agile strategy. So that's important. And in the end, if you guys want so, we can discuss a little bit, have some question and answers session. Starting with why and why we do need portfolio management. And here we will have the old and good from strategy to execution. Um, think about a portfolio that's like an element that will connect our strategy to our execution. So what is important here is to see a portfolio as this element. And here I will use it as an example. If you guys have an strategy that will be strategy goal of get married, so your strategy for this could be win, conquer your partner and heart through the stomach. So good food. And for this case, your portfolio will be which recipes you must learn and which recipes you must practice. And the execution is you going to cook for. So the idea here is the portfolio is your recipes, your strategies to conquer, to win this partner, and the execution is to cook for them, right? So the portfolio management, the idea of have a portfolio management is to help to understand which recipes you have to be prepared to do. So that's why we need a portfolio management process. And we also have here the traditional funnel analogy for a portfolio management process where the ideas came, we go through a selection process, choosing which one we will implement, and somehow we are going to prioritize those ideas, those bunch of ideas that we have in the beginning of the process. So this is also a traditional way of thinking in a portfolio management process. But of course, portfolio management goes beyond than that. And here we have some pillars where the portfolio management sit on, where they stand, they put these stakes. And those pillars are related to budget, operations, and governance. And for each one of those pillars, we will answer some questions. And the main question for budget will be where should we invest to execute our strategy? So pillar for our portfolio. The second one for operations. How health is our execution? The portfolio management process will try to answer this question. And the last one, much more connected to control and process and everything related to governance is are we achieving the expected benefits for from our portfolio? So three questions that are the CERN, the kernel of our portfolio management process. If we answer those three questions, we will have a good portfolio management process. Now that we had somehow a quick introduction, a quick understanding of a portfolio management process, we go in a comparison between the traditional and lean agile way of doing portfolio management. So here we have to think that an agile execution will always demand an agile strategy. So at a glance, a superficial view of the comparison. A traditional portfolio, we will have temporary teams, and always we will deal with projects. So those temporary teams are always doing projects. The portfolio will be a project portfolio. In a lean agile vision, we will use the persistent teams. The team will last longer, and we will focus more on products than projects. Talking about money, here in a traditional view, we will fund projects. We will find money for funding projects, and we will focus on cost control. For a lean agile, we will try to fund our value streams where our teams resides. So for this to have control, we will focus less on the total control of the cost and much more on the autonomy of the teams. And for this happen, we will use guardrails for the cost control. Talking about planning, for the traditional portfolio management process, we usually have a long-term budget planning. Usually the companies has a year or more than that budget planning cycles. In a lean agile organization, we need something a little bit more dynamic. So we will try to review our budget every 3 months or less, doing and using techniques for this. Also connected with this funding value streams. And talking about jobs and work intake, which initiative we will implement, we have to understand that our resources are limited. And here, in a lack of a better word, I will use resource because we are not only talking about people, we are talking about money, we are talking, why not about time? Time is also resource. So for a traditional view, for the portfolio, we do have a centralization and somehow an unlimited entry of new jobs. We are always acquire new jobs. And for the lean agile, what we are going to use? We are trying to use the idea of work in progress limits. So we will try to limit the work in progress that we have. And the input of new jobs, of new demands, of new work will be decentralized using the value streams. And now talking about how we choose where we are going to concentrate our efforts. For the traditional view, we are going to use a kind of speculative ROI, return on investment. I say speculative because we don't know the future. We will never know if some initiative or something that we are doing will have that return that we expect to have. So that's why for the traditional view, we use ROI assumptions that sometimes are not the right assumptions. And for the lean agile, we are going to rely much more on benefit hypothesis. And also, we will still have a business case, but we call it a lean business case. And the last one is for governance. I mean, governance here is to answer that question, how health our execution is. And for the traditional view, we are use a kind of governance where we have a gate process. So lots of company use quality gates and so on. So the idea here is to have progress measured by completeness. So if I did the work, I'm doing well. And a lean agile perspective, the idea is to have goals and milestone being measured by working solutions done. So the idea here is to measure the milestones and if your company is reaching the goals that they have. So this is a superficial comparison at a glance, and the idea is to go in some of those topics here, and we will discuss a little bit more about them. Once again, if you guys have any question, we can try to answer these questions during the presentation. And just put on the chat, just put on the question and answer session of your browser, right? So starting here with the traditional and lean agile view of projects, products, and teams. Thinking about things, we are moving from an old way of organizing the teams, where each project had a new team, moving to the idea of the per state teams that will be together for a long period of time. We know that when we have project team, there will be problems of handoffs, setup time, learning curves, and all of this will lead to friction and delays. But worse than that, we will see teams' knowledge and all that was learned first vanish, almost instantly disappear when the team dissolves. So the knowledge vanishing here is the worst thing that can happen in this traditional perspective of using teams. On the other hand, when we have persistent teams, we will be glad with zero setup time. For lean perspectives, it is wonderful. We can improve our DevSecOps strategy and culture. And most important than that, the knowledge and communication will work much better. We will improve the flow of communication between the teams and inside the team. So we will almost eliminate the lack of communication between the team, right? But here we will have some pitfalls. We can go to some kind of trap. So what we need to observe when doing this transformation from the old way of using teams to the new way. Um, we must observe company accounting system. How your company decide how much money put on investment? I mean capex. And maybe more important than that, what is considered capex for your company? Is this the new systems? It is the improvements that they have. The corrections on these systems are also capex in investment. Here in Brazil, we have a lot of uh, laws related to investment. So I can mention the Lei do Bem, the good law, where you can reduce the amount of tax that you pay for the government when you have somehow innovation inside your portfolio in your investment. It is also important to think about that and why. We know today that even the big ERP systems like SAP, they use a project structure to control investments. So it's very common to your company be prepared to control investment using projects. And when we think investment, we think project. The question here is, how can your company overcome this? So here, as I said in the beginning, there is not only one answer for this question. And the recommendation is adapt for the best, because each company has its characteristics and a governance model. The movement that I see that the companies are doing is just avoiding to choosing projects to fund and defining and funding for products, but it cannot be that simple for some companies. So if you are in a transformation effort, have accounting and strategic planning people from your company near you. These guys need to be transformed also. And if we are thinking about investment, the capex, we need to think about the opex also, the expense. The idea of have the same team doing development, there is somehow investment, and the system maintenance, the uh, expenses, and this idea is the core of DevOps. But how can we fund this? Your teams will have part capex and part opex budget. How will it fit in your budget cycle? Once again, what is important here is to have your accounting department and your strategic planning department people near you. These guys need to be inside the transformation. And if you guys are in a transformation effort, probably you are not in a green field. You guys have a lot of legacy systems. So it is important to establish a strategy to not hold the DevOps on this case. Keeping all the money gains that we have in a centralized and consolidated team for system maintenance, it is important, but we need to think about our DevOps strategy. So once again, there are many ways to do that. And your choice must be based on how many appetite your organization has for agility versus cost control. Are you guys willing to expand a little bit more and split the maintenance teams? Or the decision is to consolidate, to have a gain of scale. But in this case, we are going to hold the team's agility. So think about it. So we have a question here that asks the same thing. What happens when, for some reason, you can't maintain a persistent agile team? Is it possible to fall into a pit similar to the traditional ways? It's not only possible, is that thing that will happen. We will cut our your agility, because agility in the teams are here in the knowledge. When you have those kind of team setup, when we change people every time, we are create friction between the teams. We are doing handoffs. So all the knowledge that teams has, they will vanish. So if for some reason you can't keep your persistent teams, you guys are not doing agile. You're doing something else. You guys need to maintain your persistent team, right? So I hope this answered the question. So once again, if you are not keeping your team, you are not doing agile. You are holding your effort of transformation. I hope I answered the question. So going on, the next thing that we are comparing is our planning cycle. So keeping the pace about talking about money. Uh, how can your organization be agile if you stick to a plan for a long period of time? 1 or 2 year cycle. In a world that changes every week. So if the world changes every week, we stick to a plan for a long period of time, 1, 2 year. This model is much based on the pursuit of having control on the future, something that we are slowing learn that we don't have. We can't control the future. So last year and a half showed us. I think we all agree here. We can't know what we are going to happen in the next 6 months. More and more, we have to move to a new way of doing budgeting. In times of money restriction, companies go after practices like zero-based budgeting, pursuing, as I said, more control. But what we need in a always changing world is a much more dynamic budget system. And here comes practices like beyond budgeting. And also, forget about projects funding and start to fund your value streams. If you have a effort of transformation, your money do not go to projects. Your money go to fund the team. And give those teams some autonomy to use this money and reach the goal. But to keep the control, use the idea of guardrails. So guardrail will keep the team in some zone of use those the money that they have to implement something, right? Uh, it will give them much more power to make decisions, the so famous power to the edge when thinking about money. And this could be less understanding or thinking they have as having less control than this way, but you guys will see. In this way, using money to funding value stream, your company will have much more control on the money that will be spent. And now, talking about the pitfalls that we can have. And the first one is how your company publish and communicate their results, and how your company plan and report these results. There is a guidance where the company say, I this year and the other year I will spend this amount of money in investment. Is it a full year plan? Decisions of where to invest. Usually, I stick to those annually definitions, followed by the presumably return. When discuss, we will discuss return on investment soon. But the trap here is to stick to a decision during the whole year based on the plan made only once. Once a year, you go there and you do your budget planning, and during the whole year, you try to accomplish this. Once again, it gives us the idea of having control of the money, but are we having the promised return that we thinking in the beginning of the year using this budget cycle? Guys, what I can say for you here is not just that simple to change this. So the recommendation here is to define which products, which initiatives will be relevant and feel connected to the strategic strategy, and use mechanisms like participative budgeting, value stream funding, guardrails to give the thing the autonomy that I said before. The feeling of not having control can be overcome when organizations see the value stream funding give more control to budget than the traditional project funding approach. You always know upfront how much money will be spent on each initiative. The next one, we will talk a little bit more about the work intake. The traditional way of portfolio management usually requires a central structure of decision making that will control the funnel and the work intake. Sometimes it is disconnected from the team's capacity. Although this gives impression of more working being doing, in fact, it creates bottlenecks. Something like a home full of people and everyone will try to leave the room through a single door at the same time. We really know that it doesn't work. And how can we overcome this? How can we do when everybody is trying to leave the room at the same time? In this case, we organize a kill. And for a decentralization and lean agile way, we have to control the size of the kill. For some companies, it's difficult to think like this. One thing at a time is faster than everything at once. But think about the home metaphor. Isn't it logical? If one guy go through the door each time, is much better than everybody at the same time. That's why we use mechanisms like the working process limiters and control, and we will reduce the batch of the work. And also the visual things. And everything must be connected. All the Kanbans must be connected. We will have a Kanban for the portfolio, a Kanban for the solution, and Kanban for the teams. Those things must be connected. And here we can go to some traps and pitfalls. So nothing is worse to flow than silos. Creating value streams in persistent teams is one step to avoid silos. But in the helm of portfolio management, the trap will be keeping the silos in a camouflage, where each team has a Kanban and a central PMO has another, and they are not linked. So we have Kanbans, we have the feeling of doing agile, but those Kanbans are not connected. And here, the importance of a PMO, Agile PMO in a lean agile context is to manage interdependence of teams working on the same organization. We know that we are going to have vendors working in our solution. We need the guy from the infrastructure. We need the team who understand the APIs. And here the PMO has a crucial role that is to connect to those teams, and manage and help those teams manage the interdependence in between them. So the pitfall that we can go through here, PMO or a lack of visibility of our interdependencies inside the organization. That's why we have to be aware of this. The PMO in a lean agile organization, if we call it as a PMO or a VMO or whatever, those guys need to help the teams to manage interdependence between the areas inside the company, right? I think we have another question. How to set the initial working progress of a team? Is it by team consensus, or is it something that should be determined by the team's leadership? Okay, so in this case, we are talking about the helm of the team, not only the portfolio. So when I say WIP limit here, I'm talking about the portfolio. So I'm limiting the portfolio, but for a team, answering this question about the team. The most common way to do this is to evaluate the team capacity. So we will look for your velocity or something that shows your productivity and how much work you can go and put on this team. This is your work in progress, right? But remember, in a complex environment, we are working almost every time, not only with one team, we have a chain. We have lots of team working large solutions. So the work in progress here will be limited by the capacity of the whole chain. In my environment today, I use value streams, and for those value streams, we define for our value stream, we will have a work in progress of one epic for each team inside the value stream. This epic goes through a Kanban like this one here. So I will have Kanban for the portfolio, solution, and teams. But each column of this Kanban will have only one epic. So we decided as a team that one epic is our work in progress limit because I'm looking in the helm of the portfolio. If you're looking only for your team, limit limit your capacity, limit your working taking, looking for your capacity, using the velocity of the team, and also defining with together with the team, right? So I hope I answered the question. If not, we can go through this in the end of the session again. Going forward, here we have the idea of choosing which initiative to fund. In a traditional environment where projects are being funded, usually methods calculating the return or investment are used to decide which project will be funded. The danger here is to use unstated assumptions that will give the false impression that such project will have undeclared return when in fact we don't know if it will happen. The process used to control it in a traditional way is the post implementation review. And we know a few companies do that. And if they do, it is a long, long way after the implementation finish. So in a lean agile environment, the idea is to have yet a business case, but not for the full implementation. You have a business case only for the MVP, where hypotheses can be tested and measured, and decisions are made afterwards if the funding must be kept or not. And in the lean agile, the focus will be on measure and check the health of your product and check if these measures are increasing the health of our product. Decisions have to be made, but based on numbers collected from your MVPs and releases. So the mantra here is to measure, measure, and measure. So we go from a speculative ROI that is mostly a blind guess to a build, measure, and learn process. And the trap, the pitfalls. The trap here is all behind the process of decide who will be funded by a strategic planning department that centralize the decisions and are totally disconnected from the efforts of transforming the organization. Old practices like the investment funds will hold the flow. Once again, strategic planning departments must be part of the transformation. They must be transformed also, using new ways of making decisions. In the realm of hypothesis validation, the trap stands behind the metrics by vanity. Think about an increasing number of access, and this do not even imply in an increasing number of user or even revenue. Choose the right metrics is the key for a good process to decide which value stream must receive more or less money for their products. It is important to pay attention to the fear of fail. If the idea is to learn, the requirement is that teams are allowed to make mistake, allowed to err, and collect more data and learn from their mistakes. Fear of fail will always lead to paralysis. And the last one that I pick and choose for our discussion here is the control, is the idea of control. And when we are talking about portfolio health, in a traditional perspective, we will think as governance gates, control of work done, and this will lead to interruptions in the flow. Inventory will be created between those gates, and the effort being wasted in inspection activities. So if you guys worked or are working in a traditional organization, you guys know that the PMO sometimes has some inspection activities. They have the gates to check the quality of your product and so on. In a lean agile environment, we will pursue the idea of self-managed teams, giving the autonomy to decide how is the best way to achieve the goal. And talking about the goals, that is how success is measured. It's not the progress of a task, not how much progress you had on a task, but by the achievement of a business goal. The progress is in this way, in the lean agile environment, the success is result. In a traditional way, success is work done. That's the mindset that we need, right? And much more than that, we will need also the self-management teams. They will have a lot of improvement and learn if they are self-managed. And the last one, and the most important message that I would like to give you guys here today. For this kind of environment, the pitfall will is the PMO that has no visibility of the interdependence is where our last challenge resides. If you want multidisciplinary, autonomous, and self-management managed teams, we will also see that in complex environments, it's almost impossible to eliminate the interdependence between teams. We need the infrastructure guy. We need the vendor. We need the specialized UX lady that will give the most precious advice for us. Here is the most important duty of an agile PMO. Once again, we need this structure to rely on to help manage those interdependence. They will be the support for the teams. Without this structure, and when I say this structure is this PMO, without these structures, there is a serious risk of starting a whack race, totally discoordinated, and will give us much more attrition and friction and much more flow interruption. So, guys, uh, this is my last message for you. Here I have once again my my contacts. Feel free to contact me.